From Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio, this is the All Access Med School Admissions Podcast. Hello again, everybody. I'm your host, Christian Essman, and I'm the Senior Director of Admissions and Financial Aid here at the Medical School at Case. And it's great to be with you again. Have a special episode for you today with a pre-health advisor, someone I just met a couple months ago at a conference, which you'll hear alluded to in my conversation with her. Her name is Dr. Darcy Holtgrave, and she is the program manager of the MEDOP Advising Office at the University of Missouri. I had the good fortune of sitting in on one of her workshops at this conference, and I said to myself, she has to come on my podcast. And so I approached her during one of the networking sessions, and she thankfully agreed to join me. And that's what you're going to hear today. And when I talked to her, I said, let's talk about some of the things that you're hearing from students that are coming to you in your office and talk about them. So that's what this is about. So we have about 4 topics that we cover on top of some other things, including the underpinnings of the workshop that she did when we were at this conference, which is about values, which I think is really interesting. So I hope you check it out. So with that said, here we go. This is Dr. Darcy Holtgrave joining me. Enjoy. Well, Dr. Holtgrave, thank you so much for joining me. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me today. Please call me Darcy.
Okay.
All my advisees call me Darcy unless I'm teaching a class, and then they might call me Dr. Holtgrave, but Darcy is just fine. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Darcy. Excellent to have you. I'm so thrilled that you agreed to come on with me. You and I met at a conference recently, and I sat in on one of your sessions, which we maybe talk about at the end. And I thought to myself, I got to get her on my podcast. And so I'm so grateful that we're able to connect during a busy semester, what's coming to the end of a busy semester for you. So, but before we get into the topics that we that we said we're going to tell our audience about, I want to talk a little bit about your background and how you got into this role as an advisor there at Mizzou as an artistic communications and small group, or AKA folklorist.
My PhD is in folklore studies, and my secondary concentration was creative nonfiction. And so when I did my dissertation focused on the way people talk about mental illness, particularly bipolar disorder, on YouTube. I'm an internet folklorist. And with that in mind, I wrote my dissertation discovering that people form these really tight-knit communities and support networks that are outside of Western biomedicine. So physicians and things aren't participating in these groups. These are peer-to-peer people who are also experiencing these issues. And what I wanted to do with my dissertation at the end of it was show the medical community these are some things that people are taking away from their treatment, from their medication. These are ways that people are finding support either as supplement or instead of talking to their physicians, talking to their psychiatrists, things like that. So when I got finished with my dissertation, I did publish an article in a book, but then at the University of Missouri, we have an office called the MEDOP Advising Office. MEDOP actually stands for Medicine, Dentistry, Optometry, Podiatry, PA. We also advise
everything.
Everything, basically pre-health. So when the position came open in the MEDOP Advising Office, I decided to apply for it because I realized it was a great way to start working with people who are in the fundamental stages of becoming physicians and being able to influence them to be more open and understanding of the ways that people think about mental illness and mental health I thought would be pretty helpful. Mm-hmm. I teach a class upon occasion for the Honors College called Folk Medicine and Health Belief Systems in the United States. And it's all about complementary and alternative medicine, with the idea being that Western biomedicine doesn't have the only way to think about health and well-being, and that people create their own systems. People have family systems. People have cultural systems by which they think about what it means to be healthy and what it means to be ill. And that's what folklore studies is all about.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah.
And that's so cool how you've found the bend and the arc to bring it into pre-health advising.
Yeah.
And you
teach
classes too. You were telling me you teach some classes too.
I do. I teach something called a freshman interest group, and that is when freshmen are coming in and they decide that they want to be pre-med or they're interested in exploring medicine. So I work with a peer learning, a peer learning assistant, I think is the technical title. And so that person is actually the teacher of the class, and then I assist with that class. I teach an MCAT prep class, and it's basically not content review. It's all about support and study skills and accountability. And those are the things. We did a lot of focus groups with students who have gone through the MCAT and found over and over again that all of them said, I made all of these mistakes, and the mistakes were I focused too hard on content review. I focused too long on content review before I started doing actual practice problems and things. I felt like I was doing it in a vacuum. I felt like I was the only person who was doing this, or the people around me, maybe we'd talk about it, but not in a productive way. And so I built this whole class around accountability and support.
Wow. So this is great. So you're not only in and leading the part of the leadership of the pre-health advising office, but you're quote unquote on the ground talking with the students in the classroom and hearing from them in the classroom. So that's why I thought you'd be perfect for this kind of conversation. So, so we have 4 topics that came up, and I asked Darcy and said, what are things you're hearing? What are some of the concerns or challenges you're hearing from students? And I know that a large segment of my listening audience doesn't have a Darcy in their life to hear from a pre-health advisor. So let's talk about the first one here. So you're going to hear her perspective and you can hear my perspective a little bit. And you'll probably hear that we have similar perspectives, but it's good to have both. So the first one that is on our list was the checklist mentality of building a candidacy. And you put in a quote like, exactly how many hours of this do I need to do? Darcy, when this comes up in your office, what's your reaction to that?
My reaction to that at first, when I started doing this job, was puzzlement, maybe frustration, thinking, why do you believe that there's a checklist out there? And the longer I've been doing this, the more I've realized that we are both working with scientifically minded people. And scientifically minded people really want to know the algorithm. They want to know the mechanism. They want to know the thing behind it, because we keep exploring, we keep making these advances, and we discover, there is a mechanism, there is an algorithm that works. And taking them away from that, moving them into exploration and uncertainty. I have a humanities background, so I am very comfortable with exploring uncertainty and being uncertain when it comes to things like even career direction. I've changed careers multiple times in my life. This is not my first career, and so getting them to be comfortable with the exploration is very, very important. But the why do they want the number? They want the number because that's an achievable goal. That's an answer. And I understand that, but that's not the way the best candidacies are born. And I wanted to turn the question around to you, Christian, because I'm sure that you see this in candidacies. Do you see the cookie cutter candidacy?
Short answer, yes. Common question we also receive, yes. And I get it, because some people just like, I just need to know maybe what's a ballpark number? Like the common response from us is, well, it's more than 8 hours, so more than a day. But does it have to be 250 or 500? And so I understand that when this comes up, that students sometimes just like, I don't know, how much do you really think I need? Or what is the most common thing you need? And med schools can run our data on those who we decide to interview and those who we have accepted and those who have matriculated. And we can just run the numbers and say, of those we interviewed, of the 800 people we interviewed, they had 551 average hours of shadowing. I mean, that's just the numbers. and I made that number up, by the way. So just on the fly, I don't even know the number off the top of my head. But what we always come back to is, how meaningful was it? Their writing is really what lets us know that, of the insert number of hours that they did, this is what they took away from it. This is, and I think students need to remember, we talk about holistic review on this show all the time, and it seems like the biggest black box, but it's about the context. So if I was an applicant that I had to work 20 hours a week, or I was an athletic applicant, or I was in the band, and something that's like taking up a lot of my time, I may not have all the time in the world to go do shadowing. But when I was there, and the way I wrote about it, somebody could read like, gosh, that guy was really soaking it in. Boy, he really understood, he was taking away the reflections and the things. And so his numbers might be smaller compared to somebody that had 1,000, but the way he wrote about it made it seem like he really gets this. So that's why we try to emphasize the writing and self-reflections versus just trying to churn out hundreds of hours that may just seem like the checklist. How does that sit?
That sits exactly with my experience and how we try to work with our students. And with that in mind, the things that we encourage students to do is what they're passionate about. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's medicine because they want to go into medicine. So get out there, do shadowing, get involved in volunteering, working, all those things in the hospital systems. And while they're there, the quality of their observations, I loved what you said about that, because the quality of their observations is super important in showing that not only were they present, mm-hmm. they were present, that they absorbed and are able to then fit in that experience with everything else about their interest in candidacy in general, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that exploration, it initially for a lot of people is a little bit haphazard, and that's fine. That's one thing that I want to encourage students to get out there and do. Be voracious in what you're exploring. Get out there and shadow physician, but while you're there, look at what the other people on the team do, because you might see something that you mm-hmm. love just as much, and it's not cheating on your dream. Mm-hmm. It's refining your dream if you see another thing that's interesting. Like, let's say you see genetic counseling, and genetic counseling looks amazing, or social work, or whatever. Mm-hmm. Two baseline things. We hope that you like science and want to help people. Yeah. Okay. Right. But
kind of important. Yes.
Very important. But I too like science and want to help people. Mm-hmm. It's a joke I make all the time, but I am a disaster in a chemistry lab. So, this was never my calling. So with that in mind, that the number of hours follow. You do the things that you love, and the accumulation will happen over time. With starting out students, the first things we like them to start out with are shadowing and service. And the shadowing, absolutely in a healthcare setting, right? But also if they might be thinking law, if they might be thinking something else, education, great. Look at that too while you're doing that. It's only going to inform what you want to do. And if you find things and you don't like them, that's just as informative as if you find things and you do like them, right? So getting that in the context first, and then starting to nail down, what is it about that context that you like? What is it about that experience that was interesting? The ability to articulate that then comes through exactly what you were talking about later on in your personal statement, in your interview materials, but being able to start working on that now. So we encourage people to start a log of some kind. Mm-hmm. Yes. And that log should look like something they will keep with them. If it is a physical thing, great. If it is a Google Docs, also great. Whatever that they will have on their hands for the next 3, 4, 5 years, depending on how long they're exploring, right?
Yeah.
And what did you do? How long did you do it? What did you love? What did you not love? And then maybe even next directions. What does this inspire you to do? And why I say shadowing and also service, I think that exercising that muscle of wanting to help people as soon as possible is super important, because people sometimes say, I want to help people, but haven't done the work to demonstrate that they want to help people.
Yeah. I do have some people question me every once in a while, say, why is shadowing important? And sometimes it's physicians that say, I have people come in my office. Sometimes they slow me down. Why is this important to you guys? And I know not every med school values shadowing as much as others. So it's a little bit of a broad spectrum. But I think in our argument is this is pretty high stakes professional school to be entering, to arrive here and then actually be out in the wild in the hospitals and then realize, ooh, I don't like patients, sick people, suffering,
yes.
smells. I mean, just there's so many things that it would be it's not the best. It's not ideal to be getting into that point and then realizing I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And so there really is something to, I think, career exploration to kind of see if this is really something I can see myself doing or not. And like you said, that's okay. You're allowed, you're usually at a younger age to make those kind of forks in the road and go in different directions.
Yeah. And so the moment at which you see the things that you don't like about the job and you're willing to say, I don't like that, but I'm still able to do it and willing to do it in order to do the things I do like about the job, that's when you have a great sense of realistically what you're getting into.
Yeah. Additionally, I'll add one more layer on there. What we also hope sometimes students will see is this. I cannot think of another word right now, but unglamorous, I don't think is a word, but the unglamorous side of medicine, but that students will see that sometimes physicians don't take time to eat lunch and sit down and have an hour break, and that people aren't always happy with them. And there's a lot of bureaucracy in hospitals and they're there late doing charts at the end of the day and getting home late and getting up early and doing it all over again. Some of just the warts of medicine and so is that something you want to do? You'll miss holidays at home or miss recitals for future children and important life events because your professional life will bleed into your personal life. And so if you're in those kind of environments and hearing from physicians about, this is some of the sacrifices I make, but that's why I come back every day, so we want them to hear those kind of stories too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
From the people doing those jobs.
Yeah. And as for the rest of the candidacy pieces, we talk about leadership. Leadership experience is very valuable for getting people to understand when you're in the healthcare setting, you're a leader of the team, you're also a member of the team. And so making sure that you can handle yourself in both situations to get concrete experience in that. We talk about possibly getting involved in undergraduate research. Research can be a great addition to people's candidacy. It's not always required by the school that they're looking at, depending on what they want to do. But it's always a good idea to at least explore it to see whether it's right for you. And I speak from the experience of my own institution. We are an R1 institution, which just means that everybody's doing research. So when you find instructors whose classes you enjoy, when you find people who are doing research and things that you're passionate about, maybe you're interested in looking for cures to cancer, right? We have several labs working on different aspects of that. So finding something that will key into your interests and your passions, very, very valuable.
Yeah.
And then I have students who think about, you know what? This goes into our part.
Yeah, let's segue into the next one, or number 3. Go to number 3.
segueing into the next question about the belief that outside activities and things that are not related to medicine are completely irrelevant to your candidacy for medical school, I want to tell you that sometimes that can be the crowning piece of your candidacy for medical school. Because if your desire to become a physician is tied to, let's say, for example, food insecurity, because you want to help communities who have issues like that. So if you are doing things like working at the food bank, and you're also involved in the horticulture club, growing herbs that will then go to the food bank, right? There's ways that you can tie all of these kinds of experiences together into a narrative that illustrates your why, your motivation, your drive. And so do the things you love, do them well, do them passionately. Become the president of the crochet club, become the treasurer of the fencing club. These are both real examples from my students. And that can speak to your abilities and interests outside of medicine and also within medicine. So,
yeah. When you mentioned the person that was working at a food bank, and I've read applications of applicants who I can't think of a specific person, but I've read these stories where they worked at and this was cool. Like, it came up in a missions committee. They worked at an organic farm in the summertime, and during the academic year, when they went back to school, they worked at a food bank, and they were very interested in plants and growing. This was like, this is a real story. Like, what you're saying is like very true.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, oh, Christian said I got to go work at an organic farm. That was just an example, but of tying together your interests that ultimately can lead to this career pathway. But it's just showing that how you've done this and tied some of these things together. They don't all have to be tied together, though.
Right.
Like, you don't have to try to tie every single thing you've done in your life that leads you to medicine someday.
Right.
But there are some themes you can pull together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We at the University of Missouri do a committee interview process. And as a result of that, we review the CVs of 90, 100 candidates every year. And I can't tell you how many times in doing those CV reviews, I have had conversations with students who have kind of a bare bones CV. There's maybe something in every category, like healthcare, research, et cetera. And I asked them, is this the entirety of your undergraduate experience? Like, since you graduated undergraduate, is this everything that you've done? And they say, no, I thought it wasn't important that I managed the car wash. Right?
Yeah.
I didn't think it was important that I spend the summers helping build fences on my family's farm. And these are all experiences that show those core competencies. The AAMC has the pre-med competencies. Everybody out there, I recommend strongly, you get out there, you look at the AAMC's pre-med competencies, and you look and see what you think you have done that demonstrates that you have that competency. And there are things like capacity for improvement. Am I remembering the new ones? Boy, okay.
Yeah. It's okay. I'll put a list in the show notes so they can
fantastic.
See it right there.
Yeah. But there are reliability and dependability is one of the competencies. And how have you demonstrated that? Absolutely. If you manage a car wash, you are absolutely demonstrating that you have those competencies. So don't be shy about talking about those kinds of experiences, because that could be the thing that really shines in your overall why and your overall application.
Yeah, reminds me of when we were doing a prep call for the plenary session of that conference that you and I are both attending. And it was with a couple advisors, and they were saying how they have a list of questions that they ask their advisees, like, what are you doing when you're not in school? What are you doing when you're not in college, or when you're not on campus, or when you're over the summer? And to help students draw these kind of stories out, because they were just hearing just the science related things or just the medically related things. And then these kind of things come, oh, I manage a car wash, or I work at my parents' convenience store. And they're like, well, you got to put this on your application. And students just sometimes forget that they can, and then they should, or they don't know that they can or they should put this on their application. Exactly to your point. And then it's very easy to tie some competency-based writings or some reflections about those experiences to your application. It's very easy to do that. Darcy, so we're talking about like activities, and I'm sure you have some students who feel like they're missing out on something, that a phrase you used with me was comparison is the thief of joy. And I love that. And so how do you approach that when you have students sitting down with you and they're like, you know what, everybody else is doing this and I'm not? How do you talk them off the ledge?
Well, I feel like first I need to cite that correctly. Who said?
I looked it up. I didn't find out who though. I just looked up I'm like, is that correct? Yeah. Comparison
that
is the
is
thief of
the
joy.
saying. Yeah. That comparison is the thief of joy. So one of the challenges and one of the joys of being at a relatively large institution is that I have a substantial pre-med population. And what's great is that they get to be around each other for inspiration. They get to share resources and things like that. The analogy I tell them is that I own a home and I have a front yard and I have a backyard. And my front yard is well manicured. It has flowers. Everybody in the neighborhood looks at my front yard and says, wow, that's a beautiful front yard. And in my backyard is where my dogs live and dig holes and do their business. And my backyard's a mess.
Yeah.
Okay. And the thing I like to tell my students is that when people are talking about their experiences, they really are only talking about their front yards. Mm-hmm. Not that everybody has a backyard like my backyard, mm-hmm. but there are always continua, is that the word? Mm-hmm. There are ranges of experiences and things that they don't know the full story.
Yeah.
So the thing that I would recommend, if a student is looking on Reddit mm-hmm. or other forums, they can be useful again for inspiration, mm-hmm. but not to use that as a yardstick. They need to make up their own yardstick. And you might remember from my values presentation that the yardstick is a very, very important thing for my advising model and the way I think about things, that everyone has yardsticks that they should be living by based on their core values. If they can do the internalizing work to think about, what do I value? How am I going to express that I have that value? What am I doing? What can I be doing more of? What don't I need to be doing because they don't fit in with my values? Then that can help people really get a sense of this is me and my candidacy. And that will help them be individual in their candidacy. That will help them be secure as much as one can be secure mm-hmm. in anything, right? In their candidacies. And that's what I want students to do. I don't know if that was coherent in how I explained it. But
I'll add some color to it because I would say, because I hear this from candidates too, or potential candidates, then they ask, what about service? What should I be doing? Well, there's all kinds of service. What's your community? And a community could be anything. Community could be the town you live in, the church you go to. And so there doesn't have to be a cookie cutter, like you mentioned earlier, of what that could look like. And so I think it's very easy for students when they live in the bubble of a college campus and they see a large group of people doing the same thing, but they're like, well, that really doesn't feel like me. It's okay to kind of veer off and do whatever it is that makes you excited and makes you want to get out of bed and happy to go do that thing today. And that then bleeds through in the application because usually they write about it more enthusiastically. If they make it to the interview stage, they talk about it more passionately. So it's okay. And like you said earlier, and you didn't use this word, but I will. It's not as articulate as what you would use, but I say like probably the beginning part of your college is kind of messy.
Oh, sure.
Because you're trying to figure stuff out. You're trying mm-hmm. to, there's like a gajillion clubs and you're trying to I don't know, which I just sign up for stuff and try them out. And they don't have to be perfect. And then you kind of figure out, I like this one a little more than that one. And so you kind of, you figure out what you're the ones you really enjoy going to more. And a thought came to mind. And one of my experiences, this happened to me when I was in college many, many years ago. I was pre-med at one point, and there was a a myth, let's call it a myth on my campus, that if you didn't go to the trip to Nepal, you're never going to get into med school, because the kids who went to Nepal trip last year and the year before that, they all got into med school. So here I was trying to convince my parents I have to go to Nepal, and they're like, what? And they didn't get the whole thing, and I ended up going. But quite frankly, I couldn't afford it, and so I felt like, oh my gosh, FOMO on the Nepal trip. But a number of other people I went to the meetings with didn't end up going either. So, and I don't think everybody that went on the trip actually got into med school, but we'll not talk about the data, but that experience happened to me. And so I can see how it's very easy to should kind of try to put your blinders up and just kind of focus on, what your pathway is. Mm-hmm. But to your point, looking at some, forums about, maybe give you ideas. And like I said, inspiration. Some of them I've had come on my show, like the Horseshoe Farms thing about the guy that has the thing down in Alabama and out in California. Like, it's just inspiration. You don't have to do it, but maybe you'll find something similar in your community, or something that kind of makes you think like, oh, that sounds cool. I don't know if I could do Alabama, but there's maybe something in my backyard that might scratch that itch. So, I'm glad to hear that you find that to be, and try to put students at ease.
When I meet with students who come to me with that idea, so-and-so is doing X and Y and Z, and I should be doing that too, right? And I tell them, no, you should be doing what you want to do and why you want to do it. The relief is palpable. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to getting involved in things, I believe strongly in the spaghetti on the wall method, right? Where you just throw a bunch of spaghetti up and whichever ones are done are going to stick. And whatever sticks, whatever you enjoy, you keep doing. Again, do it well. The hours will follow, the leadership, the accomplishments, everything is going to follow as part of that. And that's the most outstanding candidacies I've seen have come through with that kind of approach. The other thing I like to encourage people to do is to think about what challenges them or what maybe intimidates them, scares them a little bit.
Love that.
When it comes to working with people, especially, I try to recommend to students that they do something that scares them a little bit or intimidates them a little bit, especially when it comes to working with people who are unfamiliar to them. Mm-hmm. Because the only way to make that less scary is to get proximal.
Well said.
Learn about the people. Mm-hmm. Learn about the communities. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to answer my own question. I'm going to ask myself is, why is that important? And I think that's important. And I think med schools value that, because the patients you'll eventually be seeing, sometimes even as a first-year medical student, are not your age group, are not from your campus bubble, your town, and you're going to see all walks of life. And so if you're only comfortable with your age group or the people that you have grown up with, then that's going to be could be uncomfortable for you as a doctor in training, to be interacting with different people from different walks of life. That makes me think, and I use this story frequently, and if I've told it before, you have to hear it again. But I remember interviewing a candidate who was volunteering at hospice, and because a friend said, you should volunteer at hospice, and I was like, okay. Like, everybody else is doing it, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so he said, I felt so dumb. He's like, what? I'm a 21 and a half, 22-year-old student. What is somebody who's in hospice? Why do they want to see me in their room? Like, I don't know who they are. My God, they're in their some of their last weeks or months, And he's like, I just felt so dumb. And he's like, so I went into somebody's room and I sat down and I introduced myself. And I just felt like I should walk out right now. And it was a gentleman said, "Hey, I love baseball." They had a baseball game on it. "Oh, I love baseball too." So they sat and they watched the baseball game together and just talked about baseball. Then he said, the next time I went, I sat with in an elderly lady's room, and she was sleeping, and she woke up and she said, "Will you hold my hand?" And so she went back to sleep, and he just held her hand. That was it. But he said, he's like, I started to get it. I started to get it, why this is important. And to me, that rang empathy so loud. He saw and learned and felt what empathy is, just being in the room.
That's beautiful.
And that's why that stuff's important. Yeah. So this is, to your point, like when you started to say, go try to do something that's uncomfortable, scary a little bit, like I'm not used to doing this, that's leaving your comfort zone. And admissions committees pick up on this stuff. When you write about, I did something that like totally took me away from my safe little place, and I put myself out there and I kind of trudged through, and it was uncomfortable and it was heavy and I didn't like it, but I started to kind of, okay, I get this, and I got better at it, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a quote from Adventure Time that Jake the dog says to Finn the human. He says, "Dude, sucking at something is the first step toward being sort of good at something."
Is that the one that goes, Adventure Time? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I've seen that. Yeah.
And it is a pretty genius show. But legitimately, all of these things, empathy is a muscle that you have to exercise. Cultural competence. Mm-hmm. Cultural competence doesn't just come through passively observing and watching movies, reading books, whatever. Cultural competence comes from genuinely getting into a place where you can interact with people who are different from you. Mm-hmm. And these are all things that you can learn about, that you can engage in by service. And I encourage all of my students to do that. That is one of the best ways to use your service opportunities. It's great to work in the back of the food bank where you're packing the food, because that gets you to know, like, hey, these are the logistics behind putting together 500 hot dogs for meals, right? But when you're actually in the grocery store part of the food bank, and you're helping people who are the market part, I should say that, when you're actually in the market part of the food bank and you're helping people get their groceries, you're learning more about the individuals that are food insecure, and it gives you much better perspective. Yeah. And often my students tell me how surprised they are learning about food insecurity and just how common it is. Mm-hmm. It's such a common issue. Yeah. Yeah.
You hear the why and the stories behind that, and that can help shape you and also be things to talk. And I'm not saying this strategically, but like these can be things you talk that can come up in interviews. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Somebody might ask you, what's a patient or a person that you'll never forget from some of your experiences? And you'd be, one time I was volunteering in the market at the food, and this person shared with me how they became food insecure. And it was devastating to me to hear blah, 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 blah. That's how this stuff comes up in interviews.
That kind of sensitivity could be the thing that prompts that person, when they're a practitioner, to ask the right question to a patient to then get them the resources that they need.
All right, let's move to number 4 here. And this is our last one. And it's the fear of the bridge year. You used I remember sitting in your session, and you said, some people call it the gap year, but we call it the bridge year because a gap is something you fall into. A bridge is something you build. Did I get close to your quote?
That is exactly it. I have to credit one of my colleagues. She was a former recruiter for our institution. She's retired for that. But legitimately, a lot of people have fear of taking a year because gap sounds like you're at loose ends, aimless, not going anywhere because you've fallen into it, right? But when you plan it, you can do a lot of amazing things in that time period. And when I mention it to students, I've started actually mentioning it to prospective students because I want parents to hear these words. It is really okay for someone to take a year between undergraduate and doing
whatever's next.
Doing medical school, doing a graduate degree, whatever. And I want to really normalize that. Not just a year, 2 years, 3 years. I took, what did I figure out recently? 7 years between my undergraduate and my master's degree. And then I went for a master's degree. I have a master's degree in poetry, actually.
I had a 20 plus ish gap year. I'm sorry, bridge year between my undergrad and master's. So yeah. Bridge.
Never too old. Bridge because we were building during that time period, building what we were interested in and figuring out what the right next step is. There's a subset of the population that feels like undergraduate from high school is an automatic, that's just what you do. And I like the encouraging of a bridge year to be very intentional about that next step. Do you genuinely want to do this? And a lot of students come to me with the concern that their brains are just going to melt during that year between undergraduate and starting medical school. And I tell them if they're that unsure about their brains, that 1 year of being out of school it's not even knowledge, although some of it's knowledge, some of it's ambition.
Yeah.
Some people are very concerned about their ambition to continue afterwards. And that definitely is concerning to me, because if you're that worried about your ambition, you're talking about 4 years of medical school, 3, 4, 5, however many years of residency, right? That's a long time.
If that 1 year is going to ruin that ambition or that dream. Yeah. It's quite common. I think it's okay to think about, consider a bridge year. I certainly don't want to be the one saying everybody has to do that. But I was looking at some AAMC data of the matriculating students in 2024. 74.3% of students that completed this questionnaire, which was 15,000 people out of the 22,000-ish, those that matriculated last year in 2024, 74.3 indicated going to med school a year or greater after undergraduate. And that's been increasing over the last several years. I think it was 64% in 2022. So it's common. And I do realize that it can also, if you're on financial aid, you get 6 months of grace period after graduation. And then if you took out federal loans, you have to start paying those back. So there can be a financial piece that comes into play. However, to your point, and something that's been talked about on my show so many times, is that if you feel like there's just some things that you didn't get to do during the 4 years that you were in undergrad, go do them after you've graduated. Continue on that exploration, or you want to work a little bit and save some money for the application process. Happens all the time.
When students talk to me about, especially the financial concern, that is a big concern. I do always encourage them to talk to their financial aid department and find out what is repayment going to look like if they have loans that are going to be coming into repayment. We have the joy of having a medical school on our campus. So we have the MU School of Medicine, which is literally within walking distance of my office. And we get to have medical students come to our classes and sit in and talk about things. I had a panel not too long ago with medical students, and one of them was a medical student that I had worked with as an undergraduate. He was directly my advisee, so I got to see him in this panel. And he had not taken a bridge year. Everybody else on the panel had, and he was just so exhausted. It was like a visible counterpoint to everybody else on the panel. It was a bad day for him, so I feel like maybe it's not the best example, but legitimately, burnout is real. And burnout can happen when you don't listen to your body or your spirit that's saying, hey, there's some other things I need to do. I need to rest for a while. I need to explore just work. Yeah. And when I got into my first job after undergraduate, I don't know about you, were you just shocked at like what 9 to 5 was like?
Yeah, I worked shift work, and then, that was sometimes double shift work. Yep.
Okay.
So that was a wake up call.
It was stunning that, wait, I have to just be here for 8 hours. This is my job, is to be here the whole time. I can't go run home.
Yep. Sit down, relax. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the student who on the panel seemed to be a little more exhausted or tired than the others.
Gray.
He
was gray.
If I could speak for the med school population, we don't want you to come burned out. Because once you get on that train, it doesn't stop for a kind of a long time, which you alluded to earlier, 4 years, and then plus your residency training years. I mean, it's a long haul. And I will frequently tell interviewees on our interview day, there's some of the, I'm biased because this is the population I work very closely with, but pre-meds are some of the hardest working people on a campus.
Yes.
I mean, they got to kind of keep their foot on the accelerator for 4 years, really, being thoughtful about what they're doing and their whys and all this, keeping their journals and all the stuff we've talked about, that it can be exhausting on top of all the academic work they're doing and things like that. So people can get to the end of the senior year and just be like smoked.
Yeah.
And can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
I remember speaking with a student one time from, he applied to us, and this was a number of years ago before these bridge years weren't as common. And I said to him, like, Gary, you could have applied last year. You have an amazing application. Why didn't you apply last year? Because it seemed like, a year out. This was, again, a long time ago. It seemed like, he's been gone out of school a year. He's like, last year, some of my friends who were seniors, I saw them apply to med school during their senior year, and they were miserable. And they were taking some of their hardest classes, and they were doing a senior thesis, and they missed the fun stuff of being a senior, but they were absolutely miserable because the process is long, and you put it's psychologically draining sometimes, and you have to step away from school to do interview days and miss, so he said, I didn't want to mess with that. And I decided I'll apply after I graduate, and it worked out wonderfully for him. But I remember that sticks with me because you got to remember your senior year. That could be really rough and also fun.
Yeah. So from your point of view, what makes a good bridge year for a student? Like, what kinds of things do you see being really productive for them?
Things that are meaningful for that person. And so it's hard for me to put, I'm always careful about my words when this comes up because I'm always careful. I don't want to be, Christian said this one thing, because we try to put all this stuff into context, because there's going to be applicants who say, I took a bridge year or two because I needed to work and save money and to prepare for this application process because I'm not getting a lot of support and blah, 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 blah. So that makes sense. There's been some people who during their undergrad didn't do a whole lot of medical exploration. I've had people like, I went to a really small school in rural insert state, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity for me to shadow physicians in that area. And when I went home, I had to work. And there's like part of the story. So during their bridge year or two, they went to a much larger city and did clinical research coordinator, where they're rubbing elbows with physicians and they're seeing some research, but they're also seeing patients. So it kind of, for a lot of students, it's like, that makes sense. So, it doesn't, there's not a prescribed like, everybody should be doing these 1 or 2 or 3 things, but really it's kind of like, well, what do you think you might want to do or need to do, or really have inspiration to want to do during that year or two? Mm-hmm. Some people like, I just wanted a break. I wanted to move to a big city. I've never been I wanted to live in a big city. And I worked a couple part-time jobs. One was a bartender and the other one was, I volunteered at a shelter, that I have with people, homeless people I really hadn't been exposed to from my little town, all kinds of stories. So as long, that's the meaningful stuff that sticks to us, that like stands out to us. Like, oh, wow, that makes sense. Wow, they've grown. Our admissions coordinator or counselor, Dr. Kathy Lee, who was an advisor up until recently, she calls it a growth year. And it's the same kind of thing. Like, hey, go grow, go build something, go grow. And so I know that's probably not a satisfying answer. That's a very
satisfying answer for me, especially considering the only thing that I try to encourage them to continue to do is something that's related to medicine. Even a little bit. Mm-hmm.
Keep your toe dipped in it a little bit.
Keep shadowing, keep something so that it demonstrates your continued interest in the field, but then find things that fit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot of things here. The one thing I wanted to wrap up with you, Darcy, was a little bit about the presentation, the workshop you gave at the CAAHP, which is the central region for the NAHP, the National Association for Health Professions Advising. And you talked about it was like a values exercise, basically. Could you talk a little bit about that kind of in a nutshell and why you feel that's important for your advisees to be thinking about their values?
So the title of my talk was The In-Between, Cultivating Self-Awareness and Intention in Second-Year Students, and you too, because I was presenting to advisors. And I feel like, well, maybe 5-6 years ago, I was in a presentation where the audience was entirely advisors, and the presenter gave us this values exercise. And the values exercise is you can find decks from cognitive behavioral therapy or maybe dialectical behavioral therapy, I'm not sure which, or maybe even motivational interviewing. But the idea is that you look at a deck of maybe 50, maybe 60 different values. And the values are things like joy and justice and ownership, and doing something that gets you to rank those values as to what's most important to you. Out of curiosity, what was your top value when I gave you that presentation?
I remember it being either curiosity or happiness or family. I had I've done the values exercise before. It's hard because people are like, if you couldn't have 10, what would be your top 5? So you whittle it down. But usually, the ones have been curiosity, family, and happiness.
Okay. Yeah. And one of the things that I asked everybody to do in this presentation, and that I encourage maybe all your listeners to do too, is to find one of these decks. You can get them for free online. You can buy them online. So really just get your hands on one of these decks and sort your values. Figure out which are your top values. And when you do that, think about what you are doing that supports that value in your life. With that in mind, the whole context behind that is thinking about second-year students, where the sophomore slump comes into play. I say second year because a lot of students are like third years or juniors by credit.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Right. But I'll call them second years. You're in your second social year of undergraduate. And that slump can come along. It looks really different for pre-med students because these are high ability students. These are all go, go, go. So when I talk about academic deficiencies, academic disengagement, those kinds of things that Greg Jolly mentioned in their article, which you can give you the link and you can post it. Those kinds of things do happen to our students, to our pre-med students, but they don't show on transcripts quite as well, but they still feel it, And one of the things that the second year can do is because it's the first year is kind of like exploring and, getting your feet on the ground, figuring out college. And then a lot of students go home for the summer where they're with their families again, which can be kind of a jarring transition depending on how that is for you, But then coming back the second year brings into stark contrast again, you're driving the bus. Right. And so clarifying those values can help you clarify your purpose. And when you think about those values and you add them into what am I doing that demonstrates I have these values? What am I doing that is against these values? Or am I not being honest with myself about what my values are? And how can I use the things I value? Like, let's say friendship is one of your top values, which is incredibly important during this time period. You can use it to party on the weekends. You can use it to form study groups, right? These are two different ways to express that same value, that friendship is important to me. So thinking about that purpose and aligning these all together so that you're moving yourself forward. Nobody's perfect. You're always going to have slips or things that don't quite fit. But if you can just keep using that as your yardstick to measure your experiences by, and that was Stephen Hayes, who was with acceptance and commitment therapy, said that values are chosen life directions and self-directed meaning. So thinking about that, thinking about finding your purpose and articulating that purpose can be a very inspirational thing to do in your second year. Third year, fourth year, I do it myself on the regular. I try to make that realignment with those values. So yeah, that was basically what my presentation was about.
And it was tremendous. It certainly left an impression on me. I mean, I was very much energized by it when sitting in that room and with all like-minded people who were excited about it, and everybody was participating. And which that's when it's a good workshop, when you say, okay, we're going to let you guys do the work now, and people just don't go, so when's lunch? And okay, what are you guys going to do tonight? You guys have plans for tonight? And oh, we're supposed to be doing work. No, but everybody was locked in, doing the thing online, the phone thing online, and doing the values thing. And
talking to each other about their values and how the values fit in with what we do in our profession, which I thought was just great. I loved hearing all about that. Yeah,
it was really inspiring and energizing. And as you're talking about that, Darcy, I could foresee a student who takes the time to, like you to use your words, align their values, maybe try it once and then come back to it again. I could see how that might bleed into your personal statements and to some of the essays that you write, and helping to come to your why, when a lot of times people say, why did you do this experience? Because it was it aligned with some of my values. And I think if somebody's going to use this on me someday, but if you are an interviewer and you hear that, I think growth mindset, I think curiosity, intellectual curiosity, emotional intelligence, all kinds of things can come to mind if you exercise and practice some of these things. Could really help when students ask me, how can I stand out? It's doing some of the hard work like this. Doing a personal deep dive sometimes can help you stand out someday, perhaps.
I'm doing a mustache twirl that won't show well on the podcast, but it's absolutely designed. We do this as a sophomore workshop. It's designed then to pave the way for those conversations. Junior year, third year, sorry. It's designed to pave the way for those conversations third year when somebody's deciding, is this my application year? Am I going to be applying this year? How well have you articulated what you've already done? And are you moving forward toward those goals? So.
Awesome. Well, Darcy, I've taken up more time than I anticipated from you today. So I want to thank you so much for coming on here and having a great conversation and sharing some of your insights, your expertise. And I think it's going to be incredibly valuable to a lot of people. So I'm very grateful again.
Christian, thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you for everything that you're doing with this podcast. I think it's an incredibly valuable resource.
Well, thank you. I really enjoy doing it, and I couldn't do it without people like you. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, real quick, before you go, if you found this episode helpful, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to my podcast, wherever you're listening to this. Your subscription helps more aspiring medical students discover these episodes, providing them with the same insights they need and helping to build our community, right? If you're feeling generous and you have a moment, please leave a review. Your reviews not only make my day, but they'll help other future doctors like you find this podcast and allow us to continue growing. Finally, as I always ask, please share this episode with a friend who's thinking about applying to med school, but maybe he hasn't quite taken that first step yet. Sometimes all it takes is the right guidance to get started, and that could be you. Also, keep in mind, on Spotify, they've added a new feature where you have the ability to leave comments and threads, kind of like on Instagram and TikTok. So do that, and I'd love to see your comments and perhaps reply. So check it out, and see you next time. Thank you.